Thank you all for coming down tonight. Thank you for braving the inclement weather on this South Florida summer evening. We are live from Books and Books in Coral Gables, Florida, so a note to our internet audience watching at home. If at any time during the presentation you'd like to purchase a copy of tonight's book, just call the number on your screen. We will take care of that for you. We will get it signed, and we will have it shipped to wherever you are in the United States free of charge. For those of you watching overseas, the shipping charge might be just a little bit more. This evening, Books and Books is very happy to welcome Ms. Joan E. Childs and her new book, Why Did She Jump? My Daughter's Battle with Bipolar Disorder. Ms. Childs has been a licensed clinical social worker since 1978, specializing in change work for human potentiality, personal growth, and self-actualization. As a resource program presenter specializing in women's issues, couple and family relationships, and personal effectiveness, she has appeared on many radio and television shows and before live audiences. And she is also the author of the previous book, The Myth of the Maiden, on Being a Woman. In this book, she recounts the details surrounding the tragic death of her daughter, Pam. Although technically a suicide, Ms. Childs explains why her daughter's life was taken by the most unforgiving of executioners, bipolar disorder. It was the delusions, not her daughter, who made the final decision. Why Did She Jump lifts the veil of shame and secrecy to forge a path to understanding bipolar disorder and other mental illnesses. Please give a very warm welcome to Ms. Joan E. Childs.
Wow. And I'm not even Hillary or Joan Rivers, and look at this. Thank you. I first want to thank everybody that came, my family, my friends, my colleagues, and even my clients are here. So I just have to say a warm welcome in this horrible day that you actually drove down to Books and Books to be part of this wonderful, auspicious occasion, and I really am so grateful and feel so blessed to have all of you here. My daughter is here, my son is here, my brother's here, my sister-in-law, my cousin, and all of you are wonderful. You're making me feel so good about this experience. And it was a tragic experience, there's no question. So I don't really have anything planned because I wrote this book, started it 16 years ago. My daughter passed away. She plunged to her death on July 2nd, which was a few days ago, 16 years ago. She was 34 years old. She was a PhD psychologist and a licensed clinical social worker, and probably known among her clients and from other professionals as a wizard therapist. So how does this happen to somebody like her? She was brilliant, and she was beautiful, and she was as good as she was beautiful to the core. And I guess the first thing I have to share with you is, why did I write this book? I don't think, as a grieving mother, I had a choice. Hi, Marlon. I'm looking around and I'm seeing faces. I'm so happy. You made me feel so happy on this occasion. Pam, when she passed away, and just like you were told a few moments ago, it was called a suicide. I don't believe she ever committed suicide. I don't think she had a conscious awareness of what she was doing. I think that her mind was fractured by this horrendous, insidious disease that we know today as bipolar I disorder. And I make a distinction when I say the word one, because for those of you that are not familiar with bipolar disorder, it is a spectrum, kind of like the autistic spectrum. It goes from sort of like innocuous bipolar 2, which is very manageable on certain medications for mood disorders, and it goes to what we now know as bipolar 1, which is very difficult. It's what my daughter had, what breaks into a delusionary system. And in her particular case, she felt as if she had been chosen between God and Lucifer as a mediator. This was her fakakta fantasy. And I used to say to her as a therapist and as a counselor, I said, Pam, If somebody came to you, if one of your patients came to you and said that they thought that they were chosen to be a mediator between God and Lucifer, and that the devil was going to take your soul, what would you say as the clinician? And she would say, Mom, I know what you're saying. I would say that they were paranoid or psychotic, probably psychotic, and having a delusionary system that was just invading their mind. I said, well, that's what's happening to you. She said, no, you don't understand, Mom. You don't understand. I have seen the other side. I said, tell me about the other side, Pam. And she would talk to me like she was in some kind of a delusionary system, that she was chosen to be this mediator, and that the devil was about to take her soul. So I had a rough time with this. She was the first of my 5 children, and I didn't know really what to do with it, even though I'm a therapist and her father's a physician, and I have a network of therapists and psychiatrists and psychologists. I was really at a loss as to how to help her. One of the problems with bipolar 1 is medication. In bipolar 2, by the way, but bipolar 2 is a little bit more manageable than bipolar 1. And there is a distinction. And in her case, she went into a manic episode with a psychotic break. The psychotic break was the distinction between the two. And once she got there, I was never able to get her back. She was going deeper and deeper into the psychosis, even though there were lucid moments up until 2 days before she jumped. On a Tuesday, I was in Wisconsin, which you'll read about in the book. I was going to be traveling to North Carolina, where I had rented a cabin for a month, and had decided to get away from trying to be her caregiver, which I had given up on because she had decided a few months before that I couldn't be her caregiver because she saw demons around me. So she went to live with her 2 sisters, one who is here tonight, who both were inadequate to be able to handle this kind of illness, but she was afraid to be with me. I had rented this cabin in North Carolina way before. It's an amazing phenomena that we really know what we don't know that what we know, because we didn't know that we knew it. If you can ponder that for a minute. Somewhere on an unconscious level, I had a feeling that I didn't know about consciously, that she was in deep doo-doo and that there was going to be a problem. Anyway, back in Wisconsin, calling her up on a Tuesday night and saying to her, Pam, how are you? I was worried because her 2 sisters, who had been completely drained. If you're living with anyone that's got bipolar disorder, whether it's 1 or 2, you will be completely drained from exhaustion, from trying to understand what's going on. You cannot reason with them. They have their own template, their own take on what's happening. And their behavior is very, very wishy-washy. They can go from being the sublime to the ridiculous, loving and caring to crazy. So I had gone to Wisconsin because at that time there was this AOL on love, and I was one of those people that was looking for love in all the wrong places. But anyway, we all do the best we can. And I met this man who was a, what was he anyway? He was a professor of some kind of native Indian stuff. So I sounded good, doesn't it? Yeah. I'm always looking for people that think out of the box, and he thought way out of the box. But anyway, when I was talking about him, and I went to Wisconsin to meet him, and I had already met him, but I was going to travel with him back to North Carolina. My daughter Monica and my daughter Erica had also rented a cabin at the same time because they were exhausted. We kind of waffled and just kind of went back and forth whether we should take Pam with us, but she needed her psychiatrist and she needed her medication, and I was fearful that she would be away from solid ground, so we decided not to take her. But when I was in Wisconsin on that Tuesday, I didn't feel good about having her whole support system missing from her. So I called her, and this is how lucid they can be with bipolar 1. I said, Pam, how are you doing? And she said, you know, Mom, one day at a time, it's tough. And I said, I know, but how are you feeling? And she said, I'm doing okay. I'm handling it. Daddy's here, and I'm with him. She was with her father at the time, who was also a physician, by the way, but knew nothing about bipolar disorder. And as a parent, and I don't blame him, was in major denial about how sick she really was. It was the perfect storm. So I said, so tell me, how do you feel? She says, I'm one day at a time. And I said, Pam, I'm going to ask you a question that I never wanted to ask you, but I feel fearful because I'm so far away from you. I'm in Wisconsin. I'm leaving tomorrow for North Carolina. And I just want to know something. I want to know, I hate to even ask you the question, but I have to. She said, well, what is it, Mom? What's the matter? I said, I just want to know, did you ever think about killing yourself? Are you suicidal? And she said, Mom, listen, I want to reassure you that that will never happen. And the reason it won't happen, the first reason, is because I would never leave a legacy of suicide to my family. I love my parents, I love you and Daddy, and I love my brothers and sisters, and there's no way that I would kill myself and leave a legacy like that to you. That's number one. And the second reason I would never kill myself is because you always tell me that I have this fakakta fantasy that the devil's going to take my soul. But what do you think will happen if I kill myself? It's like giving him my soul. So that's not going to happen. And the last reason, number three, is I'm Jewish. We don't kill ourselves. And she was very Jewish. She was davening 5 times a day, and she was part of the Chabad at the time. So I said, okay, thank you for reassuring me. But when I hung up, I had that primordial, maternal, intuitive feeling from the goddess of motherhood, Demeter, who lost Persophones, and to the devil. And I said, I don't know, it just didn't feel right. So I called her psychiatrist, who was part of the Chabad. And I had been to her with my daughter, and I said to her, Carol, I am worried about Pam. I'm away, her sisters are away, there's no support system, her father doesn't know what's going on, he's clueless about bipolar, he has no idea how seriously ill she is. Can you hospitalize her? And she said, she doesn't meet the criteria. I said, what is the criteria? Well, she's not suicidal. She's psychotic. I said, well, I'm glad we agree on that, because there's no question that she's psychotic. But what if she gets a delusionary demand, Carol? She said, what do you mean? I said, well, she's psychotic and she has hallucinations, audio and visual. What if she gets a delusional demand that, to jump out of the window or something? Like she sees the devil and she gets scared and runs out the window. She said, well, I can't hospitalize her for psychosis. I can only hospitalize her if she's suicidal. And she's not. Anyway, she said, I'm going to see her Thursday morning. And if you want me to hospitalize her, her HMO will not cover hospitalization. How many of you have heard that? So I said, well, whatever you need to do to hospitalize her, do it. That was Tuesday night. She never made it to Carol, who was supposed to see her Thursday. On Thursday morning, she was staying at her father's, who had left her a check for her air conditioning bill that she had to pay for the mechanic who had fixed it, and some clothes that her brother, Todd, who was a physician, he was in an internship up in Ohio, he left a tie and some bathing suits. He had just been here the week before, and there was a little pile of clothes, of ties and bathing suits that belonged to him. And she was going to meet his wife, Dina, her sister-in-law. They were going to go to the psychiatrist and they were going to have lunch and go to the beach. Well, anyway, the story goes, and you'll read about this, that she never made it to the psychiatrist. While she was with her father's girlfriend of 25 years, who happened, this is part of the perfect storm, to have had an accident, and she had broken her leg. So she was in a full body cast or leg cast and couldn't get out of bed. She had been running her boyfriend, her father's business as a doctor, from the bedside, answering telephone calls and trying to assist patients. Pam had gone in there, Pamela, my daughter, and was wearing a sundress, and she said to Astrid, the girlfriend of her father, how do I look? And Astrid said, you look beautiful. And she said, well, I have another dress, I want to try it on. And she said, I feel so bad, Astrid. And Astrid said, come here and lie down. She said, why do you feel bad? She said, when am I going to get better? When am I going to give back to my family what my family has given to me? I was to learn this later at the funeral. I did not know this. After the funeral, at the Shiva, actually. She said, you'll be fine. You're getting help. You'll be well. Don't worry. So Pam went to try on another dress, and she came back with a new sundress, and she said, how do I look? Which do you like better? Astrid said, you look beautiful, both of them. She left. Astrid answered the telephone. Pam called out and said, I need to use the phone, Astrid. Astrid said, I'm on the phone, honey. Give me 3 minutes. You can use it. So what happened is that she hung up and she yelled out, Pam, you can use the phone now. I never knew this, by the way. I only knew this during the Shiva. And there was no answer. So Astrid assumed that Pam had left to go meet Dina, her sister-in-law, to go to the psychiatrist and go to lunch on the beach. 10 minutes later, there was a banging on the door. Who lives here? She couldn't get out of bed. She's wearing a full body cast. They had to break down the door, and they said, a young woman just jumped out the window. I was traveling from Wisconsin to North Carolina. I was the last to find out. It was midnight before I got to the cabin. And there was a note on the door of the rental agency that gave me the key that said, call Dr. Glassman, call Marlene, which was my secretary. You have an emergency. Your keys of your car are at the police station with your car. And I thought, what the fuck? You know, really? This is on television. I better shut up. Anyway. I get to the police station. They didn't know what I was talking about. They just told me, they advised me to please call Dr. Glassman. You have an emergency. Somehow I got directed to a telephone booth. You remember those? Remember telephone booths? This was a red one in Beach Mountain, North Carolina, which you could barely see because it was pitch dark. It was 12 o'clock midnight, no lights, just the stars and the moon. And you had to travel up roads that were hairpin turns. So I went to the red telephone booth. I dialed his number and I said, what's going on? I thought Monica, my daughter, who had driven my car up to North Carolina, had gotten in an accident. Nobody could tell me anything. And I said, don't tell me any bad news, Paul. And his response was, I'm going to tell you the worst thing you ever heard in your life. Your daughter killed herself this morning. That was 12 hours earlier. Well, I can say it to you now without shedding tears and becoming hysterical and going into a grief mode, because it's been 16 years and I went through the process of grieving. I mean, there's a lot of losses in life. I lost a mother, I lost a father, I lost a husband, I lost my best girlfriend, I lost my mother-in-law, who was very dear to my heart. Pamela was the 5th loss in 15 months. It was tragic. Nobody should go through anything like that. And I suffered immeasurably, and I had to go to work every day because I had to make a living. I was alone, and I had to support myself. And thank God I had to go to work, and thank God I had to support myself, because it was a wonderful distraction from my grief. However, I did have to go through the grief. We all have to, because grieving is the healing feeling. So what happened to me, and this is a personal experience, this book is a personal journey. I can't speak for others who have gone through the loss of a child, even though she was 34 years old. But I can speak from my heart, because my heart wrote this book. I had no conscious awareness that I was writing this book. There was a muse in me, some kind of force that compelled me to go to the computer and discharge what was going on internally. And it was a catharsis. I just started writing, and I'm technically impaired. You have to know this about me. I was born in 1939. So we didn't have the technology available to us that there is today. So for me to learn the computer on DOS yet, I started just discharging like I was journaling. And it was really my salvation, because it was my opportunity to discharge this energy. I was really not even in grief, and I didn't even know where I was, to tell you the truth. I kept seeing videos in my mind of my daughter jumping out of a 15-story window in Bell Harbor, which is now torn down, by the way. That Harbor One building is torn down. It was like God saying, we're going to get rid of this. So for me, it was a catharsis on an unconscious level, and I kept pouring out what was going on. And then I was really in what you call shock. when he told me, I'm going to tell you the worst news of your life, your daughter killed herself this morning, I went into shock. My body went into physical shock. I felt like a sword went into my stomach, up through my head. I felt like I was on fire. I didn't know what was happening, but I knew I had to get to a hospital. Well, without further ado, I'm just giving you the introduction to what happened on July 2nd, 1998. Not just to me, but to her sisters and her brothers, two of which are here today. My other daughter wasn't able to make it, but she did make it to the first presentation at Nova. So I had 5 children and lost my firstborn. And I had to deal with it, and I couldn't, obviously, because I didn't go into grief for some time. I went into shock. So I thought tonight, and I honestly wasn't prepared, I just wanted to be here with you in the moment and just let things happen as they happen, and I want to give you time for questions and answers. We're being live streamed all over the world right now, so I thought the best thing to do is to maybe do a little reading from my book to give you a comprehensive idea of what this book is about. I told you what happened, why I wrote the book. I had no choice. And I was at that time a therapist for many years. I had been working with John Bradshaw, who was really the golden boy of recovery and brought the inner child to the world as sort of like it became a movement, if you remember, back in 1989. And I still do the work of the inner child in my office. And a lot of movement since then with me too. And I became a specialist in grief counseling because of this. And other reasons as well. I see couples and I see people who've lost children. And I went to a grief group, and I saw people grieving for 20 years over their lost child. And I said, this is not going to be me. So on some level, I've made a decision, I think like the Holocaust survivors did. You can either be a victim of this kind of tragedy or a survivor. And I think I made a conscious choice at that grief meeting that I was not going to be a victim. I had 4 other children, and I wanted to be alive. I wanted to be with them. I wanted to be their mother. And I wanted to be a therapist for my clients and a friend to my friends. So I made a choice that this is not going to be me. I'm going to get through this. And I knew I was just beginning. I mean, to show you what shock does, 2 weeks later, I was back in North Carolina. I bought a 20-acre piece of property with a barn and 2 horses, and I've never been on a horse in my life. So I was in shock. I wanted to escape the reality of what I was in. You'll read about that in the book. So I want to give you a little bit of a comprehensive overview of what this book is about. And hopefully you'll get into the details of the book when you buy it and when you read it. It's not a happy book, but it has happy moments in it. And basically, I think I wrote this book unconsciously, but now that I can look back through a rearview mirror, I think it was to give meaning to my daughter's life and to her death. It's kind of like taking lemons and making it into lemonade, taking something so tragic and so painful and turning it into something that her life now has meaning. And I have this metaphysical belief that it's unshakable, that it was my daughter that got me to the computer, and it was my daughter that wrote the book through my heart. So I want to dedicate this wonderful book signing tonight to her, Pamela Ann Glassman, my firstborn daughter, and her memory, and honor her because she was the most worthwhile human being you could ever possibly imagine. And although the book talks about her illness, and remember it's her illness that made her nuts and made her do terrible things and the tragedies that we had to overcome, it was not Pamela. And I want that to be known that she did not commit suicide, even though it was officially suicide. Her executioner was bipolar 1 disorder, and they were unable to get it under control. And part of the reason, and I want you to hear me now, and I know that Obama would be screeching his head off if he heard me, but part of it was because of our substandard health system, which we still have today. And all these people that you see that are homeless are not lazy. They're sick, and they need help. and there's nowhere for them to go. And it's not the psychiatrist's fault, and it's not the psychologists or the social workers or the mental health counselors or marriage and family counselors. It's the system. It stinks, and it still stinks. 16 years later, we still don't have a place for long-term treatment. So this book had to be written, and it starts out with a letter to Oprah. And by the way, I was on Oprah, and it never got mentioned. At the time, I hadn't written it, but I could never talk about what I wanted to talk about. She kind of railroaded me to where she wanted me to go. You're shaking your head. She's a tough lady, I'll tell you. So this is a letter to Oprah that was written in 1998, August of 1998. August 2nd, 1 month after my daughter passed, and I want to share it with you as an opening to the book. And it is the opening. It's called the Preface. Falling Through the Cracks. Dear Oprah, on July 2nd, the same morning your show featured bipolar disorder, my 34-year-old daughter leaped to her death from the window of her father's 15-story apartment. Although many psychiatrists had diagnosed Pam with bipolar I disorder, I believe a major contributing cause of her death was our ineffective, dysfunctional health system. I call it the HMO tragedy. Now remember, this is 1998. A PhD psychologist and a clinical social worker, Pam had been a therapist for many years, specializing in inner child work at the John Bradshaw Center. Mr. Bradshaw had also been featured on your program several times. After moving back to Florida from California a few years ago, she continued to seek treatment with many different psychologists and psychiatrists who were unable to help her, mainly because there was no responsive, supportive inpatient facility available under her HMO. Her father, a physician, and I, a clinical social worker, helped to finance her medical needs until they became too excessive for our combined resources. Even when we tried to extend ourselves financially for the help she so desperately needed, we were denied or dismissed. She did not meet the criteria for inpatient treatment. She was hospitalized briefly several times, just long enough for stabilization, but never long enough for effective and optimum results. Each time we were given the same response: she didn't meet the criteria for long-term care. Her HMO physicians denied hospitalization many times, stating that she did not appear to be harmful to herself or to others. These were the times we elected to hospitalize her under the care of a physician, quote, not on the plan, unquote. These were the times we paid out of pocket for the care denied to her by her HMO. However, even with private extended hospitalization, the results were the same: insufficient and long and short term. Her illness quite often disguised its own implications. Along with all of her physicians, many of whom were, quote, not on the plan, unquote, we tried unsuccessfully to place her in a safe environment where she could receive proper treatment until she was safely stabilized. We learned after much time, effort, and expense that no such environment existed for the middle class. Then we pursued the governmental Medicaid disability route, which by the time she passed away had been in process for more than 3 years. Every time she followed up, various bureaucrats advised her that, quote, her application was in process, unquote, and could offer no other information. Bipolar I disorder can cause both physical and emotional paralysis. My beautiful, intelligent, loving daughter went from being a vivacious, gifted, productive woman to a terrorized, dysfunctional, regressive, and helpless little girl. Everyone who knew her both personally and professionally was both blessed and touched by the encounter. She literally transformed the lives of her patients. John Bradshaw would say that she was a wizard therapist. Her story must be told, not because she's my daughter, but because she is our daughter. Suicide took the lives of nearly 30,000 Americans in 2000. Statistics reveal that more people die from suicide than from homicide. Overall, suicide is the 11th leading cause of death for young people aged 15 to 24. Approximately 1 in 83, or 3.3 million people in the United States, have suffered interminably from bipolar disorder. Now remember, this was written in 1998. Today it's 8 million. It was not Pam who chose death. It was the illness and its insidious invasion of her mind that made the choice. Pam would never have been capable of such a heinous decision. She loved her parents, she loved her 4 siblings, she loved her friends and patients, and most of all, she cherished life. Mental illness doesn't reveal itself as clearly as physiological disorders. There are no lab tests, x-rays, MRIs, or sophisticated technology that can determine accurate diagnosis and treatment. Most diagnoses are made from clinical interviews, and because many mental disorders often overlap in their symptoms, which we call comorbidity, it is difficult to diagnose precisely. Psychotropic medication is still in a hit and miss art form that often doesn't affect change as precisely as do antibiotics, inflammatory medications, and other chemical drugs used for most ailments and diseases. Unfortunately, of all the organs in the human body, science knows least about the brain. And it's still true. We're just beginning to go into neurobiology now. We're still in the play around with it stage, meaning if the medication isn't effective and doesn't produce results, clinicians increase the dosage, change the medication or the time of ingestion, and or combine it with another. Often these medications do more harm than good and create a big price to pay for its ingestion. The side effects can often be as devastating as the disorder. Since the inception of managed care, most psychiatrists have been reduced to glorified pharmacists. Insurance benefits do not cover adequately the time a patient needs to be treated properly. The listening and counseling is often passed along to the therapist, allowing limited visits, too limited to provide adequate care. Too often the right hand doesn't know what the left hand is doing. Patients with an active bipolar I disorder, such as Pam had, must be in a supportive, controlled environment, even as productive participants of a healing profession. Her father and I were unable to secure an appropriate facility for our daughter. Despite our resources, her HMO certainly did not provide such a place. Maybe she would have died anyway. Perhaps the illness had predetermined and dictated her destiny. However, we wanted a real chance to save her from this wretched disaster. The funeral chapel was filled to capacity. There was standing room only as her friends and relatives continued to pour in from all over the country as we said our last goodbyes to her. We were all stunned. I kept wondering how a country that stands for life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness could be so inept in caring for my daughter. How many others have fallen through the cracks? This is not a story about a destitute, homeless, indigent, or underprivileged human being. At least they have a chance for survival. The state provides somewhat limited care, but offers an opportunity to get into the mental health system. If it had not been for the fact that Pam had a family, she would have been homeless. Nor is this story about the rich and famous. They can survive through their own resources. This is a story about most of us. It is a story about a gifted young woman of middle-class America whose life was lost because our system failed to do its part. Your viewers will recognize her, Oprah. They will know her. Each of them has a family member, friend, or child who may be subject to this travesty. Many have already been. One of the worst crimes in America is the HMO managed care tragedy. With all the rhetoric and promises made, the government still does not provide effective health care. We need managed care, not managed money. How can a country that is so rich in resources, so concerned about the health and welfare of its citizens, and ostensibly the richest country in the world, be so negligent and irresponsible in its response to the health needs of Americans? I don't have the answer. I'm only one voice in America. You, Oprah, are the voice of the people. Perhaps you can present a program illustrating better models of health care. Perhaps just knowing there are answers out there can give hope for solutions. I don't want to give another example of a personal tragedy as a result of a pathetic health system. You have already effectively illustrated that. I want to advocate for a change. I am hoping that you can help. It would make my daughter's life and death more meaningful and a wake-up call and lesson for all of us. Perhaps it might even save others. Sincerely yours, Joni Childs, CC, the Miami Herald, the White House, Hillary Clinton, Senators Bob Graham and Connie Mack, Congresswoman Elaine Bloom. And this is where my story began. I was raw from the grief and loss, hardly able to think of anything other than my daughter. My fingers touched the keyboard with my soul's instructions. I had nothing to do but show up at the computer. My heart wrote my story. Questions?
Joan, there's plenty of time for questions or comments from the audience. I'm sure
Okay.
someone would have.
How old was your daughter when you first noticed that she had mental disorder?
That's a very hard question to answer because she was my first child, so I had no frame of reference. I had 4 others after her. And as a new mother, I couldn't see that what was going on was strange. I thought this is the way babies behaved and children behaved. But it became apparent to me when she was in her teens that something was not right. And at 16, she left me as the custodian parent to go save, and I say the word save, her father, who had, for his own reasons, had left to go to Missouri. He's a physician. And she was mad at me because I was confronting her on behavior that was unacceptable. And to show me that she was going to be in control, she said, "Goodbye, I'm leaving." And this was after her sweet 16 birthday party, when she sat on the floor. I made her a birthday party for her girlfriends. And she said, "Mom, you're the best mom in the whole world. I want to be just like you when I grow up, and I love you more than you'll ever know." 25 days later was my birthday. I turned 40, and I had a birthday party, and she sat on the same floor in the living room, and she said, "Mom, you're my role model. I love you, and I want to be just like you." And 25 days later, she was gone. She left to her father. And I kind of suspected that nobody bolts out of high school. She was popular. She was a cheerleader. She was in the middle of a play. She had sisters and brothers and friends. What the hell was going on? And then it occurred to me that there might be some problems, but I tried to call her father and say, "I think you need to send her back. We need to work on this." And he was lonely and he was isolated, and he took the opportunity to have the connection with her. So he didn't really embrace what I wanted. And it was not that I blame him, and I stand here today before you, I don't blame him. Parents are in denial when their children are in trouble. And he had his own needs that he felt that he wanted her. He wanted to be with her. So there was kind of like a dichotomy, and I couldn't put it together. But it first happened when she was 24, with the break. She had a psychotic break. She had a manic episode with a psychotic break. Pam was not a drug user. I raised 5 kids, and I have to say this and I don't know how, because basically I was working every day, and I was not really there for them. They really raised themselves and each other, but I raised them through the drug revolution. I was in the 70s and 80s, and not one of them ever got into drugs. And she was the purest of them all. She was like, she wouldn't touch anything. She even was making juicing when juicing wasn't even what it is today. I looked at her with a blender. She would put in lettuce and cucumbers and tomatoes, and I go, ugh. But she was a purist. And she had one incident where she smoked a toke of a joint. That threw her into a paranoid. Just like that, she was taken to the hospital, and the doctor said this was drug-induced and she's going to be okay. She never smoked anything since then. But once it opened that valve, that bipolar just came up. It was like all it needed was one toke of a joint. And she was not a drug user at all. This I can tell you. I'm very honest about my five kids, because when you're in it, you don't see these things, and I'm sure they all experimented like all kids do, but none of them ever got into trouble. None of them really did anything. I was very lucky because all the mothers of the world, Sarah, Rebecca, Naomi, and all of them, Leah, they were really helping me through those troubled times. It wasn't me. I was really being helped by the women of substance that were up there. So it was 24, she had her first break, and from that point on, it was just downhill. They got her better right away. They put her into hospital. They gave her an antipsychotic. I think it was Tufrenol. She just responded immediately. She was in the middle of her PhD program. She wanted to go back and finish. I said, go back. You need to rest. Her father said, no, she's going to get a PhD. I said, but she can do it next year. She said, no, I can't, Mom, I can't because they're closing the school. It was somehow uncredited, and she was shamed by the fact that it was. And she never even talked about her PhD when she got it. She just dropped it, and she was LCSW, Licensed Clinical Social Worker. She was ashamed of it. There's a lot of things that go on in bipolar that go into the brain where they have a lot of shame, a lot of guilt. And she was one of those people. Now, I don't know about other people, but Pam was a major compensator. She could compensate, and you would never suspect it sometimes. It was like I was dealing with two people. You could have said she had a multiple personality disorder. You could have said she had a borderline personality disorder, because some of her behavior was absolutely, was outrageous. But I don't know. Whatever it was, it doesn't even matter anymore. But it seems to just bring up the worst in people, and in her case, the best. So 24 years old is when she had her first psychotic break. Yes.
I had a question. After her first psychotic break, did she start seeing a psychiatrist?
Oh yeah. And back in and I guess it was the 1990s, early 1990s, about 1991, 92. They didn't have quick diagnosis with bipolar. It was called manic depressive disorder, and it wasn't what it is today on a spectrum. And it was very hard to do a differential diagnosis like that. There's no tests. You had to do it through interviews. So it took a long time to get a differential. When I say differential diagnosis, I mean specifically, because these illnesses, these mental illnesses, do have what we call comorbidity. So they mimic other, like you didn't know if she was schizophrenic because she was delusional. They didn't know if she was acutely depressed because she couldn't get out of bed. They didn't know if she was manic because she was nuts. So it took a long time to get this differential diagnosis. And yes, it was a psychiatrist that diagnosed her with bipolar disorder. But he never said one or two because it wasn't on the spectrum at the time. But he said that she was definitely bipolar, not schizophrenic, because she would go in and out of lucidity. She'd be talking to you, giving speeches all over, just like I am right now. And you would think, my God, this girl is perfectly normal. We were on the Christina show together as a mother and daughter, because they were doing a mother and daughter show. And if you heard her, you would have thought she was fine. She died a year later. Yes?
What difference did the time make? If it happened yesterday, how would it be different due to the fact that 16 years have expired?
If it happened yesterday?
If it were to happen yesterday, did the time and the advances made any difference in the treatment that is available today?
Well, yes, we know much more now about bipolar disorder than we knew then. It was just starting to come out of the woodwork. I know there's some psychiatrists here that can say something better than I can, but basically back in the 1990s, it wasn't on a spectrum. So today they do have more psychotropic medications that they didn't have then, much more sophisticated brain medicine. And there is a woman who wrote a wonderful book. I think her name was K. Jemison Redfield, or K. Redfield Jamison, who is chief of psychology at Johns Hopkins University. And she suffers from bipolar disorder, and she's on lithium. It worked for her. It works for many people. Didn't work for my daughter. Now, part of that could be, and I want to say this in deference to psychiatry, is because a lot of these patients, like my daughter, not unlike my daughter, including my daughter, don't take the medicine. So they're what they call non-compliant. So we don't really know what's going on because I took her to Israel towards the end of her illness in December 1997. She wanted to be close to God. And she begged me to take her to Israel because I was going from my girlfriend who died, who was in Tel Aviv in a hospital with breast cancer trying to make a wedding for her daughter, and she wanted me there. And my daughter, Pam, said, I want to go too. I said, you can't go. You have to stay home with the doctor. I can't take you to Israel. Oh no, Mom, I got to be close to God. Anyway, I took her. It was a nightmare. She didn't take her medicine from Miami to Tel Aviv, try to get a doctor to give her Depakote. Forget it. It was so hard. She was delusional the whole trip. She was praying at every synagogue on her knees, a Masada, and the next thing I knew, she was at the Church of Nativity on her legs, on her knees, praying to Jesus. And then the next thing I know, she wanted to go to a mosque. And then she drove me crazy. She wanted to go to Old Jerusalem to live with the very, very religious Jews for at least a weekend because she wanted to be connected as close to God as she could be. So, I mean, it was a nightmare, and I don't know the answer to it. I do know, I have people that I work with, my clients, when I suspect that there's a bipolar situation, they immediately go to a psychiatrist because that's really out of my field. And some of them are helped. Some of the patients are much more compliant than my daughter was, and many of the medications are much more sophisticated than what my daughter had. So I don't know the answer. You know, there's a part of me that feels that this was her destiny, that she was not born to live through this world the way I am, that she did amazing work. She would transform lives like you wouldn't have believed. And maybe she was too sensitive for this world. This is a tough world to live in. And I don't think, she told me what was going to happen at 9/11 before it happened. And I said, how can you say such a thing? She says, it's the internet. It's going to be the worst thing that ever happened and maybe the best. But they're going to come over and they're going to hit those towers. As she told me 2 years before it happened. She predicted it. Now, I can't go around saying these things because you're going to think I'm cuckoo when I went around the bend. But my daughter saw this in her mind. And I said, just don't tell anybody such stuff. But she had it in her mind. I didn't really write that in the book because I really didn't want to give reference to stuff like that. I didn't want to make it a metaphysical book. But the last chapter, which is the epilogue, was very metaphysical. And I know that on a metaphysical level or on a spiritual level, that Pam told me to write this book. And I felt like she channeled me to write it. And I just went along with it, and I was in the moment all the way through. It took me 7 years to write it, and it's been 7 years since I wrote it. This is not the first book. This is the second book. The first book was called Why Did She Jump? An Angel to Remember. And I self-published it. Now listen to this. Talk about serendipitous. Talk about spirituality. It went out through Amazon, self-published. I didn't pitch the book because I really didn't think that anybody would be interested in my own personal tragedy. I didn't realize that there would be an interest in this subject, but look at this crowd here. I can say some of the people here are here to support me, but I don't think there's a person in this room, and raise your hand if you know somebody that has mental illness. How many of you know? Okay, so we are living in a culture where this is pervasive. It's pervasive. So basically what happened with the first book, you want a question? My brother?
Yeah, just a perspective. I'm Joan's brother. Pam was my oldest niece. And we spent some time with Pam before these things occurred. One time we met her in Atlanta with her then husband and during the Summer Olympics, and she was so happy and things. And then the next day, it was different. And I remember seeing Pam at her dad's apartment, and her brothers and sisters were all excited. They were going up to North Carolina, and they were celebrating their lives. They had purposes in their lives. And Pam's life was so transitory. And I remember she saying to my wife Barbara and me, they all have some place to go. They all live someplace, and they all have happy lives. What do I have? Boxes. she moved from here to there, and it was so sad, but like Joan says, this tragic occurrence was just a bolt out of the blue. We didn't know.
You didn't know.
We didn't know.
But so I wrote the book, Why Did She Jump? An Angel to Remember, and self-published, and it was put on Amazon. And I got a call 3 years ago. My kids were over, my grandkids were over, the Dolphins were playing, and they were either winning or losing. It didn't matter because the screaming was going on anyway. Who is this? Who what? She said, my name is Mary Gleason. I want to make a movie out of your book. I said, what? Who? Couldn't hear anything. Went outside in the patio, and I said, who are you? She says, Mary Gleason, and I'm a packager out in Hollywood, California. I said, how did you find me? She said, we have our ways. I said, no, seriously, I didn't pitch this book. How did you find me? She said, look, we're making a movie about Rodney Dangerfield, and we needed to get research on his wife. And her name happens to be Joan Childs. Need I say more? So that's it. Anybody?
I just wanted to know there's a questioner down there.
Okay, question.
Hi, thank you for writing the book and for your share. We've had a similar situation where our son has gone into mania and into psychosis. And we would get him Baker acted into the hospital. He's a danger to himself and others, and they only keep him a week.
You're lucky it was a week.
Yeah, I know. And sometimes, 72 hours, and they would just knock him out with Xanax or something.
Right.
So I would like to know, because I agree with you, we need long-term care.
Yes, long-term treatment.
What has happened? Have you been able to do anything? Or what can
You want to answer her?
I'd like to give some information.
Okay, good. Stand up because there's no mic.
I have a voice that can be
Okay,
heard around.
yell it out. Okay.
Back in the 50s and 60s when I worked in a state mental hospital, we had good long-term care.
Yes.
Mental health care. Kennedy came in, all the problems with his sister. Kennedy was determined to create a community mental health movement. And I can tell you that NASW, we fought it like crazy. We lost. And the problem was the community mental health system was never funded. From that day on, what you all are looking for went downhill. States found great ways to close all the hospitals.
Including Florida State
Florida,
Hospital.
I mean, it's a disgrace.
Yeah.
And we are now faced. Now, there is an effort in the new Affordable Care Act to put money into mental health. I hope it goes. But you have to understand, there was at one point somebody is shaking her head.
Yeah, I lived there.
You're old enough to have been there, right?
Right.
Okay.
And she's a clinician.
Okay, well, so am I. But at any rate,
I know
was
you.
in the olden days. But the point I'm making is, from the point of the end of the long-term care into the community health movement, mental health movement, not community health, community mental health movement.
Right.
It was never funded, and it's been
You're right.
downhill ever
Since.
If you got a week on a Baker acting, you were pretty lucky.
Well, the reality of it is that what I found out, not only with my daughter Pam, but with all my clients who were Baker acted, who were stabilized, that it was worse. They came out worse than better. It destabilized them to go in for 2 or 3 days. It didn't affect any positive change. I don't have the answer. So anyway, I never heard from Oprah.
Everybody in this room
Right.
has to fight to get mental health services into the Affordable Care Act.
Right, I totally agree with you. I never heard from Oprah. I never heard from Hillary Clinton. By the way, I feel like Hillary tonight because look at the crowd here. And I'm not Hillary, and I'm not Joan Rivers, but I'm so appreciative of all of you. I feel blessed tonight. But this is a very, very, very vital, salient issue. And it's going to take this kind of a book. I don't know who's going to get this book as far as, I'd like to send a copy to the White House, but I don't think it'll get there. But it's going to take all of you and people that you can talk to, because there isn't anyone out there that you know, just like tonight, who doesn't know somebody who has mental illness one way or the other. And I hear it every day because this is the hub. I'm at the hub. I get calls from people who their their child has committed suicide, or their child threatens to commit suicide, or their husband committed suicide. So I'm in the hub. It's a different world for me. And there's nothing, I mean, we're not supposed to die before our kids. It's not natural. So when that happens, I mean, death is bad enough if you're married to someone, if you have if a child have a cancer, it's bad enough. I've had patients who've lost children, little children, 2-year-old children through cancer, who are still suffering from that loss. But when you lose somebody that can't get the help, at least when they have cancer, they get help, they die sometimes anyway, in spite of the help. But when they can't get the help, and you're stuck, and you're not in the system because you're middle class, you know, you're not poor, but the poor has a better chance, let me tell you, of getting into Jackson. From there they get into a system. The rich have their own resources. The middle class, we just don't have it. And I remember getting a call from my daughter Monica, who's here tonight, saying, "Mom, you have to do something." And I said, "I don't know what to do." Not knowing what to do to help your own, you just feel so hopeless and helpless and powerless. It's the worst. Anyway, are there any more comments? And thank you for your comment. I wish I had a better answer. Yes?
Even the poor don't get help. They get
You're right.
institutionalized, they get drugged, they
You're
don't
right.
care.
You're right. Yeah, you're right. I mean, they're out in the streets.
There's no care.
Yes, Irv.
Part of the tragedy at this point is that the quality of psychiatric care has totally disappeared.
Speaking from a psychiatrist.
All of them are trained in 10-minute med management. They don't want to do even cognitive behavioral stuff because they want to get 6 patients in an hour. And that's part of what the problem is. If the patient comes back with a problem, they'll double the dose, they'll add 3 more meds. The side effects of most of the meds for this are terrible. Huge weight gains, all sorts of side effects that they have to struggle with.
Thank you. And it's the truth. It's what I wrote in the book. So read the book. Yes?
I don't think that for insurance companies, the psychiatric businesses are the same as medical insurance.
Yeah, right. The psychiatric benefits are not the same as physiological benefits. True.
Thank you, Joan.
Thank you very much.
All right, so a quick reminder for our internet audience at home, there's still time for you to call the number on your screen, purchase a book. Joan will sign it for you, and we'll ship it to wherever you are free of charge in the United States. Also, a reminder that our live streamed events are archived, so you can visit the Books and Books website, go to the live streaming link, and any event that we broadcast from here in the store will be saved there for you to watch at your convenience. For those of you here in the house, we have the book for sale at the counter over there. Joan will be signing at the table to the left. We have a wine reception, but I have one more request, and that is, since this room is so full, if when you stood up, you folded your chair and stacked it against the wall, it would be a big help for us to get this room cleared out conveniently and safely. So buy a book, have a glass of wine. Let's give Joan another hand, please. Thanks very much.